Serious. People of Reddit, what has been the creepiest moment of your life so far? When I was around 12, my dad took me, my little brother, and my little sister camping by a lake. It should have been a fun trip, but there was one moment that still haunts me. We went down to the lake to fish, but instead of letting us out, my dad just stayed in the car, silent, for what felt like forever. He didn't say a word. The quiet was heavy, and I remember feeling a creeping sense of unease. Something just didn't feel right. Years later, after my parents had split, my mom told me something that made my blood run cold. She said that during that visit, my dad had admitted he had almost driven us into the lake. At the time, I couldn't have known exactly what was going through his mind, but now, thinking back on that moment, I still get chills. A few weeks ago, I realized someone had been trying to get into my house. My window screen had been popped out twice. The second time it was bent and broken. I replaced it and set up a camera to see what was going on. One night, around 11:30, I couldn't sleep, so I was working on Photoshop while listening to Spotify. Suddenly, I heard a loud pop. At first, I thought my cat had knocked something over. I got up, checked around, nothing. I shrugged it off and returned to my work. A few minutes later, I heard my window slowly creaking open. The sound was horrible, like two rocks scraping together. I turned and saw an arm creeping through the opening. For a full minute, I just stared, thinking I was losing my mind. I grabbed the sharpest thing nearby, a metal ruler, and stabbed with all my strength. The hand recoiled, and a man, probably in his late 20s or early 30s, cursed loudly. Me, what? Intruder, what was that for? The ruler had actually cut him, and he started bleeding. I slammed the window shut, locked it, and called 911. 2 patrol cars arrived quickly. They asked if I had any footage, so I pulled video from the camera I'd set up. It turned out this guy had been targeting multiple homes in my neighborhood. I don't know if they caught him, but with the clear video of his face, I have a feeling they did. Last year, I woke up to my closet door slowly creaking open. Then, in the dark, I heard the eerie sound of a young child singing, coming from inside. My heart was racing. I was ready to face whatever nightmare had crept in. But then it all made sense. My cat had somehow clawed the door open, strolled inside, and stepped on my kid's Doc McStuffin's toy left on the closet floor. Suddenly, Doc was talking. Once I realized what had happened, I couldn't stop laughing, but in those first terrifying moments, I was fully prepared to battle evil. When I was 18, I worked evening shifts at a small grocery store just down the road from my childhood home, where I still lived with my parents. My schedule was always 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., not by choice, but because I had college classes during the day. Most nights, I closed the store alone. Over time, I got to know many of the regulars. I was friendly with most of them, exchanging small talk and smiles as I rang up their groceries. But there was one man, older, quiet, who always made things feel off. He never made conversation, which made the silence between us feel heavier, especially when it was just the two of us in the store and I was scanning a long list of his items. One night, as I rang him up, I noticed him staring at me. Not casually, just watching, intensely, for a few minutes. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you drive a white truck?" The question caught me off guard. I gave a small, awkward laugh. "No," I said, "I don't." He didn't respond right away. The silence stretched, long enough to feel uncomfortable, long enough for my stomach to tighten. Then he said, flatly, "Then why is there always one parked in front of your house?" It felt like all the warmth drained out of my body. My hands started to shake as I kept scanning his groceries, trying to act normal. I didn't drive a white truck, but my dad did. And in that moment, a terrible realization settled in. This man knew where I lived. I forced a response, trying to sound casual, even confused. "I don't know what you mean," I said. "I live in a different county. I don't know anyone with a truck like that." After that, he said nothing else. Finished paying, took his bags, and left. I reported the interaction to my manager that same night. From then on, I never walked out alone. Either my mom or my boyfriend, now my husband, would meet me at closing and walk me to my car. The man never brought it up again, never said anything unusual after that. But the damage was done. To this day, it's one of the most unsettling experiences I've ever had. Whether he was truly following me or there was some strange misunderstanding, I'll never know. But it changed me. I became more aware, more cautious, especially at night, especially when I'm alone. Looking back, some people have suggested he might have been a neighbor. It's possible, but unlikely. My parents have lived in the same house for decades, and we knew nearly everyone nearby. I had never seen this man, or his very distinctive gold car, in our neighborhood before. And even if he was a neighbor, there are far less alarming ways to start a conversation. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe not. But my instincts told me something wasn't right, and that's not a feeling I've ever learned to ignore. I was at a house party one night when I noticed a guy slip away from the crowd and head down into the basement, more like a separate room, really. For no clear reason, I felt this sudden urge to follow him. I went down right after him. But when I stepped into the basement, it was completely empty. I looked around and didn't see him empty. There was literally nowhere he could have gone. There was only one way in or out, the doorway I had just come through. No windows, no extra doors, no closets, nowhere to hide. And yet, he was just gone. 1 second I had watched him walk in, and the next, there was no one there at all. I woke up in the middle of the night and went downstairs to grab a drink. Nothing unusual, just one of those random wake-ups. Everything felt completely normal at first. I went into the kitchen, turned on the tap, and suddenly, 2 table mats slid right off the kitchen table and hit the floor. It startled me, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe they were just close to the edge. Maybe there was some logical explanation. Still, it definitely gave me a weird feeling. I turned to leave the kitchen, already a little on edge. That's when a singing Santa decoration we had set up suddenly turned on by itself and started blasting "Merry Christmas" into the silence. Right after that, my dog woke up and started growling. That was it. Full panic mode. I didn't stick around to figure anything out. I just turned around and got out of there as fast as I could. One night around 9 p.m., I had just gotten home and stepped inside, closing the door behind me. Nothing out of the ordinary. Seconds later, there was a knock. The timing alone felt off. I hadn't even had a chance to settle in yet. When I checked, I found a woman at my door who clearly wasn't okay. It didn't take long to realize something was seriously wrong. She had escaped from a nearby asylum. Long story short, the police were called, and she was eventually arrested. But what stuck with me wasn't just the encounter, it was how she got there. To reach my house that quickly after I went inside, she must have been right behind me, moving through the tree line, close enough to follow me without being seen. I never heard her, never noticed anything. That's the part that still gets to me. Since then, I don't go outside at night without something to protect myself. Because knowing someone could be that close, watching, following, and you'd never even realize it, that's something you don't easily forget. In middle school, there was this priest who sort of acted like a leader around the school. He always gave off a strange vibe, but since my family wasn't religious, I never really had to interact with him much. That changed one day when he showed up as our substitute teacher. He was immediately unpleasant, short-tempered, arrogant, and just generally hard to deal with. But what really made things uncomfortable was the quiz he gave us. It wasn't about schoolwork at all, it was about him. Questions about his life, his preferences, random personal details. And if you didn't know the answers, he'd get visibly irritated. I remember one question asking about his favorite sport. I thought I had it figured out. I'd seen him jogging around town in bright pink spandex, so I confidently said, running. Wrong. Another student spoke up and said, basketball, and the priest lit up. He praised him, called him a good boy, and went on and on with compliments in a way that felt off. At the time, it was just weird and uncomfortable. Later, it became something much worse. He was eventually fired and charged with abusing that same student. Looking back, that whole interaction feels a lot darker than it did in the moment. I'm not sure where this falls on the creepiness scale, but it's something that stayed with me for years. When I was 11, my mom died under circumstances no one ever fully explained to me. My aunt just told me they didn't really know what happened. I was too afraid to ask questions, so I never pushed it. I just accepted that as the truth. A couple of years later, when I was in 7th or 8th grade, I was home alone one weekend. My dad had taken the dogs out hunting, so it was just me in the house. I was sitting at the family computer, watching videos and laughing, completely relaxed. And then, out of nowhere, I smelled my mom's perfume. It was strong. Unmistakable. I froze. For a moment, I didn't even move. Then, quietly, I asked if she was there, half scared, half hoping for an answer. There was nothing. After maybe 10 seconds, the smell just disappeared. I immediately got up and went to my dad's room. We kept all of my mom's old belongings in the bottom drawer of his dresser, including that exact perfume. I checked, and it was still there, exactly where it had always been. Nothing else was out of place. It's not exactly a horror story. But even now, years later, thinking about that moment still gives me chills. Back in 2011, I was driving cross-country from Pensacola to San Diego. Somewhere along the way, I stopped in a tiny town in New Mexico to get gas and grab something to eat. I pulled up to a small fast food place and walked to the entrance just as an older man was about to go in. I held the door open for him, and he looked genuinely surprised, almost confused. He thanked me, saying that kind of thing doesn't really happen around here. I didn't think much of it at the time. I went up to the counter to order and immediately felt something was off. The cashier just stared at me. No greeting. No, what can I get you? Just staring. I glanced around, and that's when I noticed the other employees had stopped what they were doing. They were all looking at me too. Not just looking, staring. And smiling. Then I turned a little more and realized it wasn't just the staff. Every single person in the restaurant was staring at me. The whole place had gone quiet. I placed my order, trying to act like nothing was wrong, and got my food. I decided to sit down and eat, figuring I'd just take a quick break before getting back on the road. But even after I sat down, it didn't stop. Halfway through my burger, I looked up again. They were still staring. Every single one of them. That was enough for me. I couldn't finish the food. I just threw it away and got out of there as fast as I could. I've tried to rationalize it since then. Maybe they thought I was someone else. Maybe I stood out in some way I didn't realize. But whatever the reason, it was one of the creepiest experiences I've ever had. In high school, a friend and I got out early one day and decided to hang out at her house. Her parents were still at work, so we had the place to ourselves, or so we thought. The moment we walked in, we heard a loud bang coming from one of the back bedrooms. Instead of thinking someone's in the house, our minds immediately jumped to something stupid like ghost. We freaked out, ran straight back outside, and then just stood there laughing nervously, trying to shake it off. After a few minutes, we worked up the courage to go back in and actually check what had made the noise. That's when we saw it. Her brother's room was completely trashed, drawers pulled out, things scattered everywhere. It didn't take long to realize what had happened. The house had been robbed, and we had walked in right in the middle of it. They ended up taking a gaming system, a bunch of video games, CDs, and some jewelry from her parents' room. At the time, we were more shocked than anything else. It didn't fully hit us how dangerous that could have been. Looking back now, though, we were incredibly lucky. I once got a voicemail from a man with a heavy accent, and what he said wasn't just unsettling, it was chilling. He spoke slowly and deliberately, repeating over and over, "I'm going to kill you. I'm going to slash your throat. I'm going to kill you." It wasn't shouted or frantic. It was calm, methodical, like he meant every word. The message went on like that for nearly 3 minutes. Instead of panicking, I decided to call the number back. After a few rings, someone picked up, and it was the same voice. "Who is this?" he asked. I replied, "I'm the guy you just called and said you were going to kill. I was just wondering if I could get a few more details." There was a long, uncomfortable silence on the other end. Then he said, "Wrong number. Sorry." Click. And that was it. I never heard from him again. It was around 2 a.m. when I got ready for bed. I took off my clothes, tossed my socks into the corner of the room like I always do, and got under the covers. About a minute later, something suddenly hit me in the head. I jumped and looked around, confused. It was one of my socks, the same one I had just thrown across the room. At first, I tried to make sense of it. Maybe it bounced back somehow. But I knew how I tossed it and where it had landed. And there was no clear way for it to have come flying back at me. There was no one else in the room. No fans running, no open windows, no furniture nearby that could explain it. I was completely alone. It probably sounds minor to someone else, but in that moment, It felt anything but normal. I didn't get much sleep after that. This happened in early 2010. My first wife and I had separated in September 2009, but I was still living in the house while I searched for a job in another city. Our daughter was only 6 at the time, and the closest opportunities for my work were about 3 hours away, so finding something took longer than I expected. We were living in a 4-bedroom house in Virginia, with all the bedrooms upstairs. Because we had a child, the law required us to be voluntarily separated for a year before we could begin divorce proceedings. I had been sleeping in the guest room, which was right next to the master bedroom and across from my daughter's room. Every night, I made sure to lock my door, partly for peace of mind, because my ex could be unpredictable, and that was the only way I felt comfortable enough to sleep. One night, I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. I opened my eyes and saw her standing beside my bed. Not at the doorway, right next to me, on the side closest to the wall. If you were looking in from the door, she was standing about 8 feet away, in that narrow space between the bed and the far wall. She was just standing there, staring at me. I couldn't see her hands, so I quickly rolled out of bed and asked what she was doing. Without missing a beat, she just looked at me and said, "I wanted to see what you were doing." It was one of the most unsettling moments I've ever experienced. Fortunately, a few weeks later I was able to secure a job in another city and move out. That was the end of living in that situation. Looking back, that period was part of a much longer and more difficult custody battle that followed. Over the years, there were multiple incidents, legal issues, and a long fight over custody of my daughter. Eventually, after years of persistence, and with my daughter's own wishes taken into account, I was finally granted custody. It took a long time to get there, and a lot of things had to happen before that outcome was reached. But that night, waking up to find someone silently standing over me in the dark, that moment still sticks with me. Here are 2 experiences that happened while I was working the graveyard shift at a gas station in southern New Mexico. Some of the strangest things I've seen when I was completely alone. The first one started like a normal night. I was stocking shelves, trying to make the store look presentable, when a couple came in. I greeted them, and they asked where the restroom was, so I pointed them in the right direction. I stayed out on the floor, continuing my work, when I noticed the man, along with what looked like a small boy, walking around and picking up items. Eventually, they made their way to the register. I went over to meet them there. The girlfriend started placing items on the counter, and we made small talk while I scanned everything. At some point, I casually asked what their son was getting. They looked at me, completely confused, and said they didn't have any children with them. I froze for a second and told them I had clearly seen a young boy following the man around the store. The mood shifted instantly. It freaked them out, and honestly, it freaked me out too. The second experience was even stranger. I was cleaning near the hallway that leads to the restroom when I saw an older man come out. He looked like an elderly Hispanic gentleman. He gave me a small smile, then walked toward the coffee station. I didn't think much of it at the time. I went back to what I was doing and waited, expecting him to come up to the counter. But he never did. After a while, I started to feel uneasy. I asked one of the fuel attendants to help me look for him, thinking maybe he went into the back or another area of the store. We checked everywhere, the kitchen, the storage areas, even the restrooms. Nothing. No sign of him anywhere. The attendant just looked at me and told me to go get some sleep when I got home. But I know what I saw. I don't necessarily find this creepy myself, but I know others might see it that way. It's a long story, so I'll keep it as brief as I can. In late 2017, my 17-year-old son died in a car accident. After his passing, I started noticing something unusual. I would constantly see the number 33 everywhere. That also happened to be his jersey number. Over time, that led to a lot of people suggesting it was some kind of sign, something to do with him still being with us. Maybe they believed it, or maybe it was just something comforting to say. I'm not entirely sure. My son had worked at a golf course since he was 14, and he became very close with his boss there. After his death, the two of us ended up connecting as well, and we would share these kinds of experiences whenever we saw each other. Then winter came, and I hadn't spoken to her since the fall. One evening, I got a text from her that completely caught me off guard. She told me she had been thinking about my son while driving to a training session. Then a song by Tenille Townes, "Jersey on the Wall," came on, and she started crying for him. As she was driving, she looked up and noticed the road she was passing by and sent me a map of it. She said she felt like maybe my son was telling her to reach out to me. I had never heard that song before. When I replied, I told her, "Today is my son's birthday." She responded, completely shocked, saying she had no idea. That moment alone was overwhelming enough, but it didn't stop there. When I later looked more closely at the map she sent, I realized she had been driving past a road that shared my first name. That unsettled me a bit. Curious, I decided to look up the song she mentioned. It turns out it's about a high school senior who died in a car accident. That hit me hard. I ended up crying for a long time, whether out of sadness, comfort, or both. I honestly couldn't say. I don't feel creeped out by these coincidences. To me, they felt meaningful. On my son's birthday, I was overwhelmed all day. I stayed busy at work, then went home alone so I could just let myself feel everything. I didn't want company or comfort from anyone, because nothing could replace him. But somehow, that day, it felt like he found a way to reach out and let me know he was still there in some way. One night, my internet went out, and I had to get some work done that involved downloading and rendering files. My dad offered me the key to his office so I could use the connection there, so I went in late at night to finish what I needed. Around 2 a.m., I was sitting at his desk waiting for a file to render when I suddenly heard loud banging at the door. At first, it sounded like someone was forcefully slamming it over and over, but that didn't make sense. There was a metal security grill that had to be opened first, and it made a loud noise whenever it was used. There was no way someone could be banging on the door like that without making a lot more noise getting through it. But the sound kept going, and it was getting louder. I slowly got up, checked the door, and locked the metal bar across it. Then I hurried back to the desk, trying to stay calm. The banging eventually stopped. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then I heard it move. The sound shifted to the windows, second-floor windows, with nothing below them. There was no way for anyone to be out there, let alone making noise like that. I stayed awake the entire time, too unsettled to relax. The sounds finally stopped around 3:33 a.m. Since that night, I've never gone there alone after dark again. I was trying to meet some friends at an event when I was given the wrong address. I ended up at a mostly empty venue, but since I figured it had to be nearby, I went inside to see if there were any flyers or signs that could point me in the right direction. As soon as I stepped in, I saw an older man wearing a denim one-piece coverall, like the kind worn by janitorial or maintenance workers. He asked if he could help me with something, and I told him I was looking for the event. He didn't seem to hear me clearly, so I moved a bit closer to repeat myself. Even then, he kept shaking his head, saying he couldn't understand what I was saying. Then, suddenly, when I was close enough for him to hear, he said something completely out of nowhere. "Well, I don't know anything about that, but did your daddy touch you when you was little?" I immediately recoiled and started backing away. As I did, he began moving toward me. I looked around, trying to figure out the quickest way out, and noticed a nearby entrance to a skywalk. At the same time, I spotted a female security guard making her rounds. I took off running toward her, and the man started chasing me. When the guard saw me running toward her and frantically pointing behind me, she reacted instantly. The man stopped abruptly, then turned and sprinted in the opposite direction, moving faster than I expected for someone his age. The guard shouted after him and took off chasing him as well. I didn't stick around. I got out of there as quickly as I could and later made it very clear to my friend how badly they had messed up the directions. I've had a lot of strange things happen in my life, but this one still sticks with me. It was a false awakening dream, where you think you wake up, only to realize you're still dreaming. It's an experience that can feel incredibly real and terrifying. Back in 2013, I was dealing with a lot. I had moved out of my mother's house, where I had experienced abuse, and was living with my boyfriend at his grandmother's home. I later realized that his grandmother was also abusive, and her behavior was worsening as she developed dementia. One night, while I was asleep at his grandmother's house, the nightmare began. In the dream, I woke up in my old bed at my mother's house. She was standing over me, screaming at me to wake up. I was confused and asked where my boyfriend was. She told me that wasn't his name, that I had actually been dating someone else, someone from years before. That thought alone terrified me. I started to question everything. What if my current life, the relationship, moving away, everything, wasn't real? I told her something felt wrong and that I might need to go to a hospital. Then everything shifted. I woke up again, this time in my boyfriend's grandmother's house. She was standing over me, yelling at me to get up, calling me lazy, and telling me to get out of her house. She threatened to call the police. I panicked. Then I woke up back at my mother's house. She was upset, saying I had just passed out after talking to her about going to the hospital. Then I was back at the grandmother's house again, with her continuing to scream at me, insisting I leave immediately. This cycle kept repeating, back and forth, about 10 times, each time waking up in one place or the other, both women yelling at me, each version of reality feeling completely real. By the time I actually woke up, I was completely shaken. I genuinely believed I might have lost touch with reality. For at least a week afterward, I was on edge, constantly questioning whether I was truly awake or still dreaming. Even now, years later, the memory still affects me. When I feel anxious, I sometimes hear fragments of those voices in my head, echoes of that dream, and for a moment, I start to question what's real again. It faded for a while as my mental health improved, but recent stress has brought some of those feelings back. It's one of the most unsettling experiences I've ever had, and one that stayed with me ever since. When I was 18, I moved into a ground floor apartment at the edge of town, near a semi-wooded area. That first weekend, my two roommates were out of town, so I had the place to myself. Around midnight, I got out of the shower and was getting ready for bed when I noticed my cat sitting on the edge of my bed. She was completely frozen, staring intently out the window with that wide-eyed, tense expression cats get when something has them on edge. I checked the window, but since the lights were on inside, I couldn't see anything outside. I shrugged it off and went back to brushing my teeth. When I glanced back at the cat, she hadn't moved. Still staring. Same intense, focused look. That's when I noticed the silence. I turned off the water and suddenly heard movement outside, right beyond the window. At first, I assumed it was just an animal in the gravel, but as I listened more closely, it sounded like footsteps. I turned off the lights and slowly peeked through the blinds, just in time to see a man step out of view. It felt like he noticed me at the exact same moment, because as soon as I moved the blinds, he shifted away from the window. I stood there, holding still, trying to process what I was seeing. After a few minutes, he appeared again. The moment he saw me still watching, he moved away once more. Then I heard him. The sound of gravel crunching as he walked around to the other side of my apartment, toward my bedroom window. He was circling the place. For about 30 seconds, I just stood there, completely frozen. He knew I was inside. And somehow, it didn't seem to bother him at all. Then something in me snapped. I grabbed a baseball bat, marched to the front door, and threw it open, shouting something along the lines of, "All right, I've had enough of your shit." Immediately, I heard him run. I don't know who he was, but I assume he was trying to look into the apartment, probably expecting a college girl alone, and didn't realize until that moment that there was a 6-foot guy on the other side with a baseball bat. Whatever his intentions were, he didn't stick around after that. A man we'd met asked if he could go camping with my boyfriend and me. At first, we were open to the idea. He seemed friendly enough, and there wasn't anything that immediately set off alarms. But as we talked more, his behavior started to shift. He became unusually insistent and pushy, especially about the details. What really stood out was when he told us we couldn't bring our own car and that he would take us somewhere very private. That immediately raised red flags. I've traveled a lot over the years and met all kinds of people, and something about him just felt off in a way I can't fully explain. There was a strong instinct telling me something wasn't right. In the end, we never went. A work commitment came up, and we used that as the reason to cancel. Honestly, we were relieved to have an excuse. Looking back, I'm glad we trusted that gut feeling and didn't go through with it. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up to my cat making a low, tense meow, the kind they make when they sense something is wrong. She was staring intently at something near the bed, completely focused. I followed her gaze. At the edge of my bed, there was a small child standing there, looking off toward the wall. For a moment, it looked so real that my first thought was that it was my younger brother. I sat up quickly and called his name. As soon as I did, the boy turned and looked at me. At the same time, my cat started hissing, her fur standing on end, clearly agitated and staring directly at him. I was terrified. I felt like I was going to be sick. My hand immediately went to the light switch next to my bed, and I flipped it on. And just like that, the boy was gone. No movement. No trace. Just gone. I stayed awake the rest of the night, unable to settle down. What really unsettled me was that my cat continued staring at the exact spot where he had been, still tense and alert, for several minutes afterward. I don't really know what happened. I don't even believe in ghosts, but the whole thing felt incredibly real. One thing that did change after that night: my cat hasn't slept in my room since. About a year ago, my friend invited me to his neighbor's graduation party. A few of us, my friend, his younger sister, and a couple of other girls, ended up hanging out at a school playground about a quarter mile from the party. We stayed there for hours, playing and talking. But every so often, we noticed a man standing at the corner of the school, just watching us. At first, we didn't think much of it. We mentioned it to my friend's dad, and he suggested maybe the man had lost his kids or was just looking for someone. But as time went on, something felt off. Each time we looked back, it seemed like the man was a little closer than before. By around 9 p.m., it was getting dark. We were sitting on the swings when we noticed him again, this time clearly closer than before, less than 100 feet away, walking directly toward us. I asked him what he was doing, and instead of stopping, he seemed to speed up. That's when we all panicked and ran straight back to the party. After that, we didn't see him again. The next day, I heard that there had been an Amber Alert in the area, though I don't know how true that actually is. We were all pretty young at the time, around 10 to 13 years old, and the whole situation left a lasting impression on me. I worked at a thrift store that often partnered with a local homeless outreach program, so I was used to seeing people come in for help. Most interactions were normal, but there was one man who stood out. At first, he came in occasionally, but over time he started showing up almost every day, often on the same days I worked. My coworkers mentioned that he was homeless and had significant brain damage. The first time I met him, he tried to show me a collection of knives he carried on him. He wore cargo pants and seemed to have a knife in nearly every pocket. The interaction made me uncomfortable, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. One day after my shift, I was walking to my truck in the parking lot with my headphones on. I noticed there were still some donations left outside, so I went over to gather them before heading home. As I bent down to pick them up, I suddenly felt someone grab me from behind and pull me into a hold. Startled, I realized it was him. My headphones fell out as I struggled and repeatedly told him to let me go. After a moment, he released me. When he did, he just smiled, winked, and said, "I finally got you." I was shaken, but I left immediately. A few weeks later, I saw him on the local news being accused of grooming children. It was one of the most unsettling experiences I've ever had. I once had one of the most unsettling experiences of my life while studying abroad in South Africa. We were staying in a village, and in the last place I lived, Madiani, I shared a home with a Sangoma, a traditional healer, and his family, along with 3 other girls. One evening near the end of our stay, our homestay mother rushed into our room, clearly shaken, and told us that her husband was having one of his moments. We followed her into their small room and found him in a state that looked like a seizure, his body convulsing while he made strange, animal-like sounds. It was intense and hard to process. Then, suddenly, he stopped. When he spoke again, his voice had completely changed, softer, higher, and distinctly female. He spoke in their tribal language, saying that the ancestors were pleased to have us in the village. After that, his breathing became labored, and through coughing and more convulsions, that presence seemed to leave. Our homestay mother later explained that, according to their beliefs, different spirits or ancestors can enter and leave the body, and the way they leave can reflect how they lived or died. Then another spirit spoke through him, a male voice this time, sounding irritated and distant. He didn't say anything threatening, just that he didn't really want to be there to talk to us. After a short exchange, he left as well. The final spirit, though, was the most unsettling. This one seemed to know things about us that we hadn't shared with anyone, not with each other, not with our host family. It mentioned one girl's boyfriend being uncomfortable with her coming on the trip. It also knew that I had been very scared when I first arrived in the village. Then it looked at us and asked, "Are you still afraid?" We all tried to play it off and said no, but it immediately responded that we were lying. I don't remember what else was said after that. I was too overwhelmed by the entire situation to process anything further. Eventually, that spirit also left, and when our host came to, he had no memory of what had just happened. We were all just sitting there in silence, completely stunned by what we had witnessed. It was one of the most surreal and unnerving experiences I've ever had. When my grandfather was alive, he was always very particular about car maintenance, especially oil. No matter the conversation, he'd bring it up, "Have you checked your oil?" or "That car needs oil," over and over again. About a year after he passed away, I was sitting at a stoplight when I suddenly heard his voice, clear as day, in my head saying, "This thing needs oil." At that exact moment, my car stalled and died right in the middle of the road. Even more strangely, a tow truck happened to be right behind me. When the car was later inspected, it turned out the engine hadn't failed because of oil, but when I asked the mechanic, he told me the oil level was extremely low and that it had been in serious danger. In 2006, I was attending a summer Arabic program in Beirut. One Saturday night, I had one of the most vivid dreams I've ever experienced. I was on campus with friends when I suddenly saw jets overhead and missiles striking the city. We started running as tanks rolled through the streets. Then there was a massive explosion, an intense wave of heat that felt so real it jolted me awake. When I opened my eyes, one of the friends from my dream had just pulled back the curtain and opened the window to smoke. It was such a strange, unsettling coincidence. The next day, I told the group about the dream. Most of them brushed it off and laughed, telling me I was being overly dramatic and that there hadn't been any recent major conflict, nothing to worry about. But that Tuesday, war broke out. Not much was said about my dream after that, until one moment that stood out. We were all on a balcony when fuel tanks at the airport were bombed. The explosion looked exactly like the one I had seen in my dream. We could even feel the heat from the blast. I broke down right there. It was overwhelming in a way I can't really describe. That wasn't the only time I've had something like that happen, but it was by far the most intense, especially because of the feeling that I might have somehow witnessed something I couldn't prevent. Back in high school, there was a small wooded area behind my parents' house. One day, my older sister told me she had found an abandoned building back there and convinced me to go see it with her. We found a strange, large concrete structure, boxy and unfinished, with an exterior staircase leading up the side and no roof at all. The door wasn't locked, so we went inside. The place was unsettling right away. There were multiple dead possums, just skeletal remains mixed with fur, along with random debris scattered around. A calendar still hung on the kitchen wall, marked 1973. In one of the bedrooms, however, there was something oddly preserved, a tidy stack of letters written in neat cursive on a desk. My sister briefly looked through them and said they seemed to reference a divorce or separation, possibly involving property. Out of curiosity, she took the letters and a few other items back home with her. Not long after that, strange things began happening around our house. That very first night, I experienced a feeling I'd never had before, a strong sense that something was standing right next to my bed. It was overwhelming, and I felt intense fear, as if I could almost hear it breathing beside me. A few nights later, I was up late playing video games with a friend while everyone else in the house was asleep. Around 3 a.m., we both heard the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. We froze, exchanged a look, and immediately ran to check. The door was closed and still locked. There were a few other incidents after that, but one stands out the most. On a normal Thursday night, I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth. My parents had gone to bed earlier, and the house was quiet. Our home had tile floors, and you can usually hear when someone is walking through it. I heard footsteps coming down the hallway toward the bathroom. Thinking it might be my mom, I turned slightly, expecting to see her. From the mirror, I could see the doorway behind me, but no one was there. The footsteps kept coming, turning into the bathroom, then stopping right beside me on my left. I felt a sudden, intense chill. I waited, unsure what I was hearing or not seeing. After a few seconds, I turned my head slightly, but there was nothing there. Then, after a pause, something spoke, very close to my ear. It was raspy and unsettling, not in any language I recognized, and it lasted only a couple of seconds. At that moment, I felt a wave of fear so strong I ran straight to my room, closed the door, grabbed a sharpened pencil, and stood there, trying to figure out how to protect myself. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but eventually I fell asleep, hoping everything would feel normal in the morning. The next day, I told my parents and my sister what had happened. That's when she mentioned she still had a trash bag full of items from the abandoned house stored in her closet. We decided to return everything. When we went back, the building was locked this time. We left the bag at the door and left immediately. After that, nothing like those experiences ever happened again. Since then, the forest and the house have been cleared and turned into a wetlands preserve. Now, when I drive by, all I can think about is where that house used to stand. I still remember waking up in the middle of the night when I was about 9 years old. The sound of a television was playing somewhere in the house, and its lights spilled down the hallway, guiding me out of my room and toward the living room. In the dim glow, I saw my dad sitting on the couch, slouched and watching TV. Feeling relieved, I ran over and hugged him, then went straight back to bed. The next morning at breakfast, I asked him why he had been up watching TV so late. He looked at me and said, "I was asleep all night with your mom." To this day, I don't know who or what I saw sitting on that couch. I work as a bartender, and one night I was closing up the bar with just my bar back. Neither of us are the type to scare easily, and we're not really into anything supernatural. After closing, we stayed behind to clean and have a quick shift drink, just trying to finish up and head home. That's when things started getting strange. While we were working at the lower bar, one of the kegerator doors suddenly swung open on its own. We looked at each other but brushed it off as nothing. Later, I went around straightening the chairs and placed a beer for my friend on the bar top. We started hearing odd noises, so we grabbed flashlights and went out to check the back patio. It was completely empty. When we came back inside, we noticed that a few of the lights we had already turned off were now back on. Again, we tried to shrug it off, thinking we were just tired and imagining things. We kept cleaning. My bar back was washing dishes behind the bar, and I went into the kitchen to put some things away. When I returned, I saw the unopened beer I had placed on the bar had tipped over. At first, I expected it to just roll along the ramp nearby, but instead, it rolled in a strange way, moving sideways and slightly uphill until it stopped right at my feet. At that point, we both started to feel uneasy. As we stood there talking about everything that had happened, I noticed something else. One of the chairs I had just neatly arranged and pushed in was now turned around, pulled out, and facing us. That was the moment we decided we were done. We left the bar quickly, almost like we were being chased. After a while, we calmed down enough to finish closing, but the whole time we were on edge. My friend drove me home in silence because neither of us could explain what had just happened. I barely slept that night. It was one of the very few times I've ever felt truly unsettled. I was lying in bed, just about to fall asleep, when my closet door slowly creaked open, like something straight out of a horror movie. The sound startled me awake, and I froze, not sure whether I should get up and close it or just try to ignore it and go back to sleep. I stayed there, wide awake and tense, for a long time before I eventually managed to drift off. I ended up getting only about 2.5 hours of sleep that night. One night, while I was home alone, I kept getting this uneasy feeling that I was being watched. Near my desk, I had a sliding glass door with vertical blinds drawn closed. I checked through the blinds a couple of times, but didn't see anything unusual. After a while, I heard a soft scraping sound, like a sneaker dragging across concrete. Feeling uneasy, I walked over to the door, opened the blinds fully, and turned on the light. That's when I saw someone standing on my porch, right up against the glass, their face pressed close to the window. Because of how they were positioned, they would have been nearly invisible from a side glance through the blinds. When our eyes met, he looked startled and out of place. He asked, somewhat disoriented, if this was Mark's house. I told him it wasn't. Without another word, he turned and ran, jumped the fence at the edge of the complex, and disappeared into the nearby golf course. I have no idea how long he had been standing there, or how much he could see through the blinds before I noticed him. Thankfully, I had just been sitting around reading, fully dressed, and minding my own business. When I was about 15, I volunteered at a hospital doing simple tasks like restocking rooms and cleaning up. One day, I was assigned to the unit where new mothers were recovering after giving birth, and I was told to bring each patient a glass of water using a cart. As I made my way down the hallway, a middle-aged man approached me. He began complimenting me, saying things like I had a beautiful smile. It already made me uncomfortable, but I politely thanked him and tried to continue with my task. The conversation quickly became more unsettling. He started asking personal questions, where I went to school, how old I was, and where I lived. I didn't answer any of those questions and moved away as quickly as I could. I reported the interaction to the nurses, but they didn't seem concerned. They told me he had behaved that way before and to just get back to work. I still had to deliver water to the room he was in. It took me a while to gather the courage to go in, but I eventually did. As soon as I entered, he just stared at me the entire time, which made the situation even more uncomfortable. I left as quickly as I could after finishing. I remember feeling especially bad for the woman in the room. I couldn't help but wonder if the man was her partner and what she might have been going through. Even though I wasn't in any real danger, the whole experience left me feeling uneasy and unsettled. The house was thick with the kind of tension that only follows a sudden death. 2 days after my stepdad's brother died of an overdose, my parents were locked in a bitter argument over something small and meaningless. In a flash of raw frustration, my mom snapped, "I wish I would die too." The words had barely left her lips when the television began frantically cycling through channels. We scrambled to find the remote, assuming the dog had stepped on it or it was lost in the cushions, but we found it sitting untouched on the counter. I watched from the stairs as the color drained from my mother's face. She looked into the empty room and whispered, "Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that." The second time was after my own father passed away in March 2016. 2 days later, my mom and I went to his house and sat in a heavy, suffocating silence. My chest felt like it was going to explode from the grief. Out of nowhere, my mom said, "Your dad is here. I feel him." I shook my head, annoyed and hurting. "That shit isn't real," I told her. "Please don't do that." As soon as I said it, a clock alarm began blaring in the bathroom next to his bedroom. We looked at each other, stunned, and went to shut it off. A cold wave of unease settled over me that I couldn't shake. For the next week, the world felt curated by him. Every time I turned on the TV, AMC was playing one of his favorite movies. Every single time I started my car, AC/DC was blasting from the speakers. It didn't matter when or where I was. His music was always there. When I was 16, I was at a gas station filling up my tank. I had just finished paying and was about to pull away when a man walked over and motioned for me to roll down my window. Assuming I had left the gas cap open or dropped my keys, I rolled it down. Instead of pointing out a mistake, he immediately invaded my space. He leaned deep into my open window, his face inches from mine, and started hitting on me. He was much older, overweight, with breath that smelled terrible, and I couldn't tell if he was homeless or just incredibly unkempt. For 20 agonizing minutes, he trapped me there. I told him I wasn't interested. I told him I was late for somewhere else. I even lied and told him I had a boyfriend, hoping that would make him back off, but nothing worked. He used his body as a physical barricade. Because he was leaning so far into my car, I couldn't pull away without seriously injuring him. I was terrified, paralyzed, and completely trapped. He did eventually lose interest and walk away, but the damage was done. To this day, I refuse to roll my car windows down more than a tiny crack for anyone. When I was a freshman in high school, I found a shortcut that cut from the back of my school through a small wooded area into the neighborhood behind mine. The woods were tiny, maybe 100 feet across, but it saved me a lot of time on the walk home. One day, after it had rained the night before, I was walking through that area and came across a muddy stretch that passed over what looked like a small creek. There wasn't anyone else around. As I stepped across it, I slipped and fell in the mud in the most embarrassing way, like something out of a cartoon. What made it strange wasn't just the fall itself, but how I felt afterward. Even though I was completely alone, I had this overwhelming sense of being watched, almost like I'd just embarrassed myself in front of a crowd. It was an intense, uneasy feeling. I brushed myself off and continued home, but I couldn't shake it. The next day, when I passed through the same spot, I noticed that someone had placed wooden boards over the creek, as if to make it easier to cross. It could have been coincidence. Maybe someone else had the same idea, but the timing felt oddly specific. Combined with the feeling I'd had the day before, it made me uneasy enough that I stopped taking that shortcut alone after that. When I was younger, I had an older neighbor who repeatedly tried to lure me into his home, and unfortunately, I didn't recognize the danger at the time. I remember one incident in particular when he nearly got me inside. I was standing right at the doorway when I suddenly became uneasy and tried to leave. At that moment, his behavior changed dramatically. The calm, friendly demeanor he usually showed dropped instantly, and he became forceful, grabbing my arm and trying to pull me inside. That sudden shift from seemingly kind to aggressive was what stayed with me the most. It was a disturbing reminder of how quickly someone's behavior can change, and how important it is to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. When I was 11, I was in my room putting posters up on the wall. I was standing on a very wobbly chair when it suddenly slipped out from under me and I started to fall backward. As I was falling, I felt what seemed like two hands press against my back and push me upright again. I quickly turned around and called out, "Mom," but no one was there. My mom wasn't even in the room. Shaken and confused, I ran downstairs in tears. I cried for hours and had trouble sleeping for weeks afterward, unable to fully explain what I had felt in that moment. About 2 years ago, I was leaving a grocery store with my 6-month-old son when it started pouring rain. I stepped under the entrance cover to wait it out when a very old, somewhat run-down car pulled up nearby. A large man inside asked if he could drive me to my car. I politely declined. He insisted. I declined again. His tone shifted. He said he was just trying to be nice, but he sounded irritated, almost angry. I said no a third time, made a point to remember his license plate, and went back inside the store. Once the rain slowed down, I called my dad, who lived in another state, and asked him to stay on the phone with me while I made a run for my car. I didn't feel safe leaving alone. With my son in the cart, I hurried through the lot, practically running. I got in my car, quickly secured my son in his seat, and rushed to load the groceries. When I shut the trunk and turned around, I saw the same man, his car now pulled up nearby. I panicked, got inside, locked the doors, and saw that he had parked right behind me and was starting to get out of his vehicle. There were no cars in front of me, just a few carts in the way. I didn't wait, I just drove off immediately. Too afraid to go home, I drove straight to the base where my husband was stationed, hoping the man wouldn't be able to follow me there. I stayed in the parking lot near his ship for about an hour, still in shock, while my son thankfully fell asleep. Eventually, my husband got my messages and came out to meet me. His command allowed him to leave with me, and I drove home while still shaken and crying as I told him what had happened. It's not something I like to think about, but it changed the way I approach situations like that. I worked at a McDonald's in Missouri, and we definitely saw our share of unusual customers. One day, a middle-aged man came up to the counter. He had a very quiet voice, wore dark khaki pants pulled up high, and had his hair slicked back in a comb-over. There was something about his demeanor, calm but unsettling, that made everyone who interacted with him feel uneasy. He ordered 3 Happy Meals, then quietly went into the play area. A short time later, he left with a child. The situation raised immediate concern, and we contacted the authorities right away. The whole encounter left a lasting impression on me and was one of the most unsettling experiences I've had while working there. I once went with a friend to pick something up, and the person we were meeting didn't have it on hand. He left to go get it, leaving us in his apartment with his girlfriend, who appeared to be under the influence and behaving in an unusual way. She decided to put on music and entertain us by dancing around the apartment, even using a pole that was set up in the middle of the room. The situation felt strange and uncomfortable, especially as time went on. We ended up staying there for a couple of hours, with the same song playing on repeat. Around us were children's toys scattered throughout the space, which added to the unsettling feeling, as it suggested a child lived there. The whole experience was off-putting, and shortly after that day, I decided to rethink and reduce my involvement with those kinds of situations. I've always been sensitive to the atmosphere of certain places, whether they feel off or unsettling. One night, my mom was driving me home after a high school play. The performance had been in a different town, about an hour away, and it was already late. The highway was mostly empty, but I didn't mind the quiet night drive. As we continued along the road, we reached a section that curved gently around a hill on the left. Nothing unusual at first, there are plenty of hills in that area. But suddenly, I was hit with an overwhelming feeling. It wasn't simple fear or nervousness, it felt heavy, almost suffocating, like something pressing down on me. I couldn't explain it, and I just sat there in silence, completely still. Neither of us had been talking much, and I didn't say anything for a few minutes. Then we rounded another bend in the road, and just like that, the feeling disappeared. The heaviness lifted completely. I thought about mentioning it to my mom, but I stayed quiet. A moment later, she brought it up herself. She said she had felt the exact same thing, and that the sensation had lifted at the same moment I felt it go away. She later explained that the hill we had passed was known locally as Devil's Punch Bowl, named for its unusual shape. She said there were local legends about the area involving strange or dark events. I don't know what caused that feeling, but the fact that we both experienced it and that it ended at the exact same time has always stayed with me. When I was 18, I started to get a strange, persistent feeling that I was being watched, even when I was completely alone. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia, since I used to smoke fairly often, but the feeling didn't go away, even on days I hadn't smoked. I was still living at home at the time, splitting time between my mom's and dad's house while finishing school. Around that period, I also began hearing an odd sound, like a human making a bird-like noise. It was unsettling, and I heard it in both places. Soon after, I started having vivid dreams about being stalked. In those dreams, someone would break in and try to hurt me. At the same time, I felt like every news story I saw about crime was reinforcing that fear, making it feel like something was always lurking nearby. One night, my boyfriend and I fell asleep watching a movie in my basement room. There were long, narrow windows near my bed. Around 2 a.m., we were woken up by my dog barking loudly at the windows. I assumed he had spotted our cat outside. Since it was late, I walked my boyfriend out to his car, but I felt uneasy the entire time. I remember wanting to ask him to check the bushes by my window, but I convinced myself I was being irrational. When I got back inside, the feeling didn't go away, it actually got stronger. I felt like I was being watched. I turned on the TV to distract myself, but it didn't help. Eventually, I went upstairs and woke my dad, asking him to check the windows. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped out onto the upstairs balcony to look down. While he was doing that, I went back downstairs to grab my phone. That's when I saw a man's face in my window. I screamed. My dad saw the man run down the driveway and chased after him, but he wasn't able to catch him. We called the police and filed a report, but nothing came of it. It could have been a one-time incident, just someone looking in that night, but the feeling I had makes me believe I might have been watched for longer than that. I work as a midwife and often take night shifts. The hospital is usually quiet at night, and I don't find it unsettling. In fact, I sometimes enjoy the calm. I'd often volunteer to take samples down to the lab in the basement just to get a break from the busier ward. One night around 3 a.m., I was walking down a hallway when I noticed a woman standing by the window, completely still, wearing a nightgown and staring outside. I was surprised to see anyone wandering around at that hour, especially someone who looked elderly. I approached her and asked if she was all right. She told me she was fine, but that she didn't know where she was supposed to go. There was a geriatric ward nearby, so I offered to walk her back. I made a lighthearted comment about how she wouldn't be getting out through the window and would need to use a door, suggesting she should wait until daytime if she was trying to leave. She didn't respond much, but she let me guide her back. I went through the door first and held it open for her while I tried to flag down a nurse. When a nurse came over, I explained that I had found the woman in the hallway and asked if she was one of their patients. The nurse gave me a strange look and said, "Which lady?" I turned around, and the woman was gone. I stepped back into the hallway, but there was no one there. I assumed maybe I hadn't noticed her go back on her own. The nurse saw how confused I was and asked if I knew the woman's name or could describe her. I told her what I remembered: a black woman wearing a frilly purple nightgown with butterflies and flowers, a gold cross necklace, and noticeable, slightly protruding eyes. The nurse's expression changed immediately. She said she died. We moved into a quieter room to talk. She told me she knew exactly who I was describing, down to every detail. The woman had been a long-term patient and had passed away earlier that same day. The nurse started crying, and honestly, so did I. At that point, I wasn't scared, just overwhelmed and confused by what had happened. When I returned to my ward, my manager wasn't happy about how long I'd been gone, so I explained everything. Other midwives overheard, and that's when it really hit me. I started shaking and felt sick, as everyone tried to reassure me that maybe I'd helped her find peace or move on. I've never seen her since, and I haven't volunteered for late-night lab runs again. During basic combat training at Fort Benning, we had a drill sergeant who usually kept things light during CQ briefs. He'd crack jokes to ease the tension, often saying things like, "I've got a sleep disorder and Tinder, so I'll be up all night." One night, though, his tone shifted. He looked at us and said, "Privates, you know what I do when I run out of swipes on Tinder? I go into the barracks and watch you sleep. Some of you are weird. You are weird." Then he pointed to a soldier from another platoon and added, "That one sleeps with his eyes wide open. It's creepy as hell. If you don't believe me, when you get up to use the bathroom, go check his bunk for yourself." We all laughed, assuming it was just another joke. But the next morning, he brought it up again. He pointed the same guy out and said, "What did I tell you? Weird, right?" A few people in the platoon quietly nodded. We all knew drill sergeants made rounds and checked on us at night, but the idea that he might be observing us that closely, down to how we slept, definitely stuck with me and made things feel a lot less routine for a while. I was walking back to my dorm after visiting a friend, about a 10-minute walk. It was around 5 a.m., still dark and quiet. I was on a campus road with no sidewalk on my side, walking near the buildings. As I went along, a car came up behind me, moving in the same direction. It slowed down and eventually stopped a short distance behind me, maybe 50 feet or so. I kept walking, but I took out my phone, just in case I needed to call someone. After a moment, the car started moving again, but instead of passing me, it matched my pace. It felt like it was following me. That's when I started to get uneasy. I picked up my pace, then broke into a jog toward a larger intersection up ahead. Suddenly, the car accelerated, sped past me, and made a sharp, questionable turn at the intersection before speeding off down the road. I never found out what that was about, but it stuck with me. After that, I started taking a different route, one that went through a building instead of walking along that road alone. When I was in middle school, a freak accident happened during soccer practice inside the basketball gym. There was a rope hanging from one of the hoops, and as we ran laps, one of the players kept swatting at it. On one of my strides, the rope somehow looped around my neck. At the exact same moment, the coach called for us to head to the locker room. I was toward the back of the group, so no one noticed, and because I was mid-stride, I couldn't get my feet back under me to stand. I just hung there, suspended and swinging slightly, thinking how absurd the situation was, until things started to get serious. My body began to convulse, and everything started to fade. It felt like my whole life flashed in an instant before everything went dark. The next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital. Thankfully, just as things were going wrong, my father had walked into the gym to get some water while waiting in his car. He ended up being there at the right moment. What always stayed with me was how sudden and random the whole situation was, how quickly something ordinary turned into something life-threatening. One night, when I was still a senior in high school, I was walking to my boyfriend's house very late, around 1 a.m., so I could sneak in and stay the night while his parents were at work. His place was about 3 to 4 miles away, and if you kept a steady pace, it was about an hour's walk. I didn't bring a phone with me since, at the time, we only had one for the whole family, and it would have given away that I had left the house. I was already a bit on edge, and when a beat-up truck slowly drove past me on the quiet road, I made a mental note of it. It felt off, but I tried to ignore it. The same truck kept passing me again and again. By the third time, I was really uneasy. When it came around once more, it didn't just pass. It stopped up ahead in the middle of the road and turned its bright headlights on, shining them directly behind me. The truck began creeping forward toward me. I tried to keep walking, picking up speed without fully running, hoping not to draw attention. As it pulled alongside me, I avoided eye contact, but I could see there were 4 adult men inside. Then the driver called out for me to stop and come over to the truck. Instead, I made a split-second decision. I turned sharply and ran straight into the woods beside the road. I could hear the truck's engine rev as they sped off, possibly trying to circle around and cut me off. I kept running deeper into the trees and eventually ducked out of sight, hiding while I heard shouting in the distance. They were yelling that they just wanted to talk, but I wasn't about to believe that. After a while, I heard doors slam and the truck pull away. I waited until it sounded like they were gone, then carefully made my way back out. I crossed the next road and stayed close to wooded areas as I continued. Eventually, I reached a bridge that crossed an interstate, and I sprinted across it like I'd never run before. I didn't stop running until I finally made it to my boyfriend's house and got inside safely. I told him what happened, and from that point on, he met me halfway whenever I walked over. We'd walk together the rest of the way. I never saw that truck again. If those people had lived nearby in such a small town, I feel like I would have crossed paths with them again, but I didn't. It ended up being one of 2 times in my life where I felt like I narrowly avoided something much worse. I went to a friend's party near Shasta Lake, out in a really remote area. One moment I was inside the house, talking and hanging out with everyone, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in the middle of a field. Her house was far off in the distance, and it was early morning, around 5 a.m., with the sun just starting to rise. The last thing I clearly remember was about 11 p.m., so there's a solid 6 hours I can't account for. I hadn't taken any drugs that night and only had a couple of beers, so I don't have an explanation for what happened during that time. I've tried to make sense of it, but the only possibilities I can come up with are that someone may have slipped something into my drink and taken me out there, or something else entirely, which feels even more out there. I'd honestly rather believe something unusual than think about the alternative. The whole thing has stuck with me because of that missing gap in time and how disorienting it felt waking up like that, completely alone in the middle of nowhere. When I was younger, my grandparents lived within walking distance of some train tracks, and I loved going there to put pennies on the rails and watch them get flattened by passing trains. One day, I noticed something unusual after retrieving a penny. It had distinct lines pressed into it, almost like tally marks. I thought it was cool, so I did it again and got another penny with a similar pattern, this time with 5 marks, the last line crossing over the others just like a tally. On my next visit to the tracks, a man in a suit carrying a briefcase showed up. He greeted me by name and shook my hand, which immediately caught me off guard. He asked what I was doing, and I told him about flattening pennies. Then he opened his briefcase and showed me a few coins inside, pennies that also had tally-like marks on them. He asked to see mine, so I handed over the ones I had collected. He took a couple of them, then placed 2 quarters on the tracks and told me I could come back for them after the next train passed. After that, he walked away, and I went the other direction. Curious, I turned back to see where he went, but he was gone. I ran back to the spot, but I never saw him again. As I stood there, I suddenly realized a train was coming. I had been too distracted and ended up far too close to the tracks as it rushed by. Thankfully, I made it out of the way just in time. When the train passed, the quarters were gone. And when I checked my pockets later, the pennies I had been carrying were gone too. When I was around 8 to 10 years old, I was visiting my sister in a mental health ward at a hospital. She was going through a really difficult time, and I remember walking off briefly to find some water. As I wandered near the lunch area, I noticed a woman being escorted out by several nurses. The scene immediately felt intense and unsettling. She was clearly in distress, and the situation seemed chaotic. As she passed, she suddenly looked right at me and screamed, "Run! They'll take you too. Run!" I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran straight back to my mom, completely shaken and in tears. Looking back now, I feel a lot of empathy for that woman and what she must have been going through. It was a very serious psychiatric unit, and I can only hope she eventually got the help she needed and is doing better now. This isn't my story, it's something my mom experienced. One day in May 2005, she was out walking our dog when she heard my dad's mother calling her name. She heard it twice, clear as day. Confused, she looked around, but there was no one there. Not even a few minutes later, about 4 minutes after that, my dad called her. He told her to come to the hospital right away because my grandmother was nearing the end of her life. The timing has always stuck with her, and she still thinks about how strange that moment was. 3 years ago, when I was about 19, my family and I traveled to Mexico to visit our grandparents. At the time, there was tension between our family and a relative's family, and both sides were very spiritual. During the trip, we were told we were also going to see a healer, someone my grandmother believed could offer protection, since she thought the other family might be trying to harm us through black magic. I wasn't really sure what to make of that, and honestly, it all sounded a bit far-fetched to me. One night, I was in bed with my siblings, getting ready to sleep. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, I briefly saw a dark, shadowy figure near the ceiling of the room. It was only for a split second, and then it was gone. It startled me so much that I started crying. My siblings noticed, but I told them I was just tired and didn't go into detail. We all eventually went to sleep. The next morning, my parents told us we were going to visit the healer. We drove out to a remote house in the middle of nowhere. When we arrived and got out of the car, the healer looked at me and said, "You almost saw me yesterday, didn't you?" I didn't know how to respond. I've been an atheist for as long as I can remember, but that experience has always stayed with me and made me question things in a way I didn't expect. It started when I was about 16. I was at work when I got a message from a friend asking, "How can you not recognize me?" Confused, I asked what she meant. She said she had just seen me in town, grabbed me, and said hello, but I had no idea what she was talking about. I told her I'd been at work all day, and whoever she saw wasn't me. About a year later, I was at college walking to the bus with my boyfriend and one of his friends when my boyfriend texted me asking why I had ignored him. When I asked what he meant, he said he had just seen me on a train, waved, and I gave him a dirty look. I explained that I wasn't even in the same town. I was with his friend, and he didn't believe me at first, insisting it had to be me. He even messaged his friend to back him up, but she confirmed I was with her and sent a photo as proof. That same year, I was living and working at a pub with my family. Around 7 p.m., my mom called me down early and told me to come to the pub. She said there was a man eating with two others who looked exactly like me. I got dressed and went downstairs, and as I entered, I caught a glimpse of someone with my hair color leaving through the front door, but I didn't see his face. The entire pub went quiet as people looked between him and me, clearly confused. Once I stepped behind the bar, customers started saying how much he looked like me. Even my mom said the only reason she knew it wasn't me was because she had just called me and knew I was upstairs. Most recently, just last week, my boyfriend messaged me asking why I was driving around his street. I was at work, so I sent him a picture to prove it. He had been walking home when he saw someone in a car like mine driving through his street, and he thought it was me, but the driver left when he got a closer look. After everything that's happened, it really feels like there's someone out there who looks exactly like me. It's unsettling, but also kind of fascinating. After a college formal in a small, unfamiliar town, a few friends and I, after a few drinks, decided to go out and find food. Since there were no rideshare options or taxis available, we chose to walk, not realizing we were heading into a rough part of town. As we walked, we started getting attention from people around us. Some homeless individuals called out to us, laughed, and even made comments warning that we wouldn't make it far. The situation felt increasingly unsafe. Eventually, a police officer pulled up and stopped us. He got out, clearly concerned, and lectured us about how dangerous the area was before putting us in his car and driving us to a late-night breakfast restaurant. When we arrived, I noticed one group of young men dressed in matching colors and bandanas, what seemed like one gang, sitting in a corner. Not long after, another group came in, dressed differently, and it quickly became clear there was tension between them. People started watching, pointing, and the atmosphere turned very tense and uneasy. At that point, a group of middle-aged people nearby quietly signaled to us that we should leave with them immediately. Trusting their urgency, we agreed and got into their minivan. At first, it seemed like they were taking us back to our hotel, but something felt off. They started ignoring our directions, and the route began to deviate. Our phones had died during the ride, and the trip ended up taking much longer than it should have, about 25 minutes longer before we finally arrived at our hotel. Exhausted and uneasy, I went to bed. Not long after, I received a call telling me to come downstairs. It was the same officer from earlier. When I got downstairs, he was waiting there wearing a bulletproof vest and carrying an AR-15. He explained that shortly after we left the restaurant, a violent incident had broken out there. Based on what he saw earlier, he had been worried about us and wanted to make sure we were safe. He stayed at the hotel overnight and left the next morning. Looking back, there were so many moments that could have gone very differently that night. At the time, we didn't realize how close we might have been to something dangerous. I'm still pretty young, going into my freshman year of high school, and I usually visit my grandparents every weekend. They're kind, quiet, and pretty routine people, nothing unusual about them. One night, around 11 p.m., I got up to grab a Diet Coke from the fridge. As I was about to turn the light off, I glanced over and saw their cat sitting in the laundry basket. For a moment, it felt completely normal, like the cat had always been there. Then it hit me. Their cat had passed away a few months earlier. The creepiest experience I've ever had actually happened in a dream. I was sitting in a cafe, drinking tea and having a normal, casual conversation with a close friend. Everything felt calm and ordinary, until suddenly, the conversation shifted. His behavior changed completely. He started mumbling things that didn't make sense, becoming restless and jittery. I don't remember every detail, but I clearly remember him saying that even though he valued our friendship, our time was over and that I wouldn't see him again. He reached out, patted me on the head, and told me to take care. Then, without warning, his body began to change. His muscles bulged unnaturally, and he suddenly became violent, flipping tables and destroying everything around him. I wasn't harmed, but the sudden shift was terrifying. The dream felt extremely real, like I was fully there. The next day, after waking up, I looked through my dream journal. That's when things got strange. For the past month, nearly every dream I had written down included this same friend. I hadn't given him a name. I just referred to him as he or friend, but he always had the same distinct personality. Sometimes he was just there in the background. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes we interacted more directly or even just watched TV together. He felt consistent across dreams, like a recurring presence. What stood out to me was that he didn't feel like a typical dream character. It felt more like he was aware or existing alongside me in the dream in a way I can't really explain. But the strangest part was that, aside from that final dream, I couldn't actually remember him at all. All the other dreams were vivid and detailed in my mind, but the moments where he appeared were completely gone from my memory, even though I had written them down. It was like those parts never happened. At the time, my dreams were so intense that the emotions would linger for days after waking up. So the whole experience stayed with me, and it left me feeling unsettled for a long time. This happened during the middle of winter, in the middle of a snowstorm. Someone from an electric company knocked on my door, and when I answered, he told me that my current provider had supposedly gone bankrupt and that he needed to check my bill or verify my account. I usually handle everything online, so I pulled up my account on my phone and showed him. He took my phone, then suddenly stepped inside and said, "It's freezing out there. Mind if I come in for a second?" I honestly froze in panic and didn't react fast enough. Now I was standing there alone, without my phone, and with this stranger inside my apartment. He took his time, looking around and making small talk like nothing was wrong, asking what I had been watching on TV, acting completely casual. Then he mentioned that it was too warm inside. He took off his hat and gloves and even started unzipping his coat, which made the whole situation feel even more uncomfortable. I remember thinking that if this escalated, I might have to defend myself. At some point, he handed my phone back. I quickly texted a friend to let them know someone was in my apartment and sent a description of him, including his name tag. I also dialed 911 but didn't hit send, just kept it ready in case things got worse. Eventually, I signed a fake name on whatever paperwork he had, just to get him to leave. By that point, I was pretty sure it was a scam designed to pressure people, which it turned out to be. As soon as he left, I contacted my actual electric company to report what had happened. One night in high school, my boyfriend and I were driving along a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, around midnight, surrounded by nothing but endless cornfields. As we headed back toward the main road, something suddenly ran right in front of the car. At first, it looked like a cow, but it was moving upright on two legs. My boyfriend slammed on the brakes. Everything went completely silent. There was no sound, no movement, nothing in sight. Whatever we had just seen was gone without a trace. We both saw it clearly, but there was no evidence of anything out there at all. We tried to laugh it off afterward, saying we must have been tired or imagining things, but neither of us ever forgot it. To this day, I still think about what we saw and what it could have been. When I was 6, my mom kicked my dad out after he became abusive. One day, my sister was babysitting me while my 9-year-old brother was at school. Out of nowhere, my dad showed up. He had picked up my brother and tried to take me from my sister's house. My sister and her husband stood their ground, refusing to let me go. They also tried to make him leave my brother with us. Luckily, my sister's father-in-law arrived and distracted my dad long enough for my sister to take me to her best friend's house and hide. I don't remember exactly how long before, but this all happened just weeks before my dad took his own life. My sister later told me she was certain that if she had given in that day, she would never see any of us again. Even though he was my dad, I was terrified. I remember hiding behind my sister's husband, 6 years old, sensing how erratic and unstable he had become. After he died, we learned he had tried to borrow a hunting rifle from a friend, but couldn't because he didn't have a license. I will be forever grateful to my strong, kind, and brave sister. She protected us fiercely and never wavered, even when it was the hardest thing imaginable. When I was a kid, a friend and I used to camp in my bedroom by setting up a tent and sleeping inside it. One night, we decided to bring along this little toy I had. It used a battery and a magnet to spin back and forth, and once you got it going, it would just keep moving on its own. For some reason, we thought it'd be fun to start it before getting into the tent, just to see how long it would last. At first, it was kind of cool, but then the constant clicking noise it made started getting really annoying. So I climbed out of the tent and walked across the room to turn it off. But right as I reached out to stop it, it suddenly shut off on its own. That alone was enough to creep me out. I didn't even question it. I just turned around and rushed back into the tent. But then, after a while, it started up again. And then stopped. And then started again. It kept turning on and off like that randomly throughout the night, the clicking sound breaking the silence over and over. Neither of us slept much after that. I moved to a tiny town when I was in middle school, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and anything unfamiliar sticks out immediately. What struck me right away was how people looked at outsiders. Not just a glance or curiosity, full-on staring. Open-mouthed, unblinking, like they were trying to figure you out on the spot. It wasn't just me. Even when I traveled with people from that town to more populated areas, they'd still do it, just openly stare at strangers. I remember having to quietly explain, more than once, that this wasn't normal behavior elsewhere, that it made people uncomfortable. Most of them genuinely didn't understand why. To them, it wasn't rude. It was just how they were. Every now and then, when I'm on a road trip and we pass anywhere near that town, friends will joke about driving through it just to see what it's like. I always shut that idea down immediately. I didn't leave on good terms, and in a place that small, there's no such thing as slipping by unnoticed. Someone would recognize me within minutes, and word would spread fast, like a chain reaction. Before I even made it to the other end of the single road in and out, everyone would know I was back. There were ways to blend in, though. If you made eye contact, you had to smile and wave. Not doing that marked you instantly as an outsider. It was like an unspoken rule. Even now, when I find myself in places that feel similar, I catch myself slipping back into that mindset, smiling, nodding, waving without thinking. Like some habits don't really leave you, no matter how far you go. When I was at university, I lived in an old terraced cottage near the Bourneville Chocolate Factory in Birmingham, UK. The place hadn't been renovated and, to be honest, it was in pretty rough condition, but the rent was cheap, so I made do. One night, I was having trouble falling asleep. I kept tossing and turning, drifting in and out, unable to settle. At one point, I just lay there staring at the wall, thinking about how things in my life weren't going great. Then I heard a faint creak. It didn't worry me at first. The house was old, and it made noises all the time. I rolled over to get more comfortable, and I swear, I saw an elderly man standing over my bed, smiling down at me. It felt completely real. I can still remember his face and that unsettling smile. It took a moment for my brain to process what I was seeing, and then I reacted on instinct. I jumped out of bed, scrambling to get away, and ended up crashing into my desk and laptop. I ended up badly bruised on my left side. I quickly turned on the lights. And of course, there was nothing there. I still believe, to this day, that I saw exactly what I saw. I spent the rest of the night shaken, my heart racing, sitting by the window and trying to calm down. I don't think I've ever felt that level of fear before or since. The next morning, I was the first one up since I hadn't slept at all. I was debating whether to tell my housemate or even call my mom, not sure if I'd be taken seriously. Then my housemate came downstairs. She looked just as tired as I felt. We locked eyes, and she just said, very plainly, "This house is something else." She then told me that she had been having issues too. Her lights kept turning on by themselves. She tried to explain it, but she struggled to put it into words, saying it sounded strange, but the lights just kept switching on, and that something didn't feel right. She thought it might be the wiring and said we should call the landlord. I told her what I had experienced. She didn't dismiss it, but she didn't fully believe it either. We both agreed the house felt off, but I know what I saw. And in the years since, I've never experienced anything like that again. Several years ago, I suddenly developed vocal palsy. One of my vocal cords became paralyzed, and I could barely speak. My voice was reduced to a breathy whisper, and the condition lasted for over a month without any improvement. None of the doctors I saw could figure out what was causing it or how to treat it. After some time, my dad suggested we try something different. He wanted to take me to a spiritual healer he trusted, a kind, elderly woman who lived in a small village and worked for free. He had seen her before and believed she had helped him. He also warned me that the experience could feel unsettling or unusual. At the time, I didn't take that warning too seriously. I wondered how anything like that could possibly scare me. When we arrived, she explained her approach. She said that some issues people experience might come from deep trauma, even from past lives, and that those experiences could still affect someone in the present. She claimed she could tune in to those events and, in a sense, connect to the people involved in them in order to help resolve and release whatever was causing the problem. I was skeptical, but I was open to trying anything at that point. She asked me to talk about what I was experiencing, saying it might help bring something forward. I explained my inability to speak properly, and she began writing in a notebook. After a few lines, her handwriting changed. The letters turned into strange, erratic marks, almost like the pen was moving on its own. Then she stopped and said something like, "Okay, here it comes." She described a scene. I was in a kind of army setting in medieval times, and I was singing to encourage soldiers. Then her tone shifted. "This is unpleasant. This is very bad." Her expression changed, and she started reacting physically, grimacing, gagging, and becoming visibly distressed. Her movements became erratic, and she kept repeating that what she was sensing was horrible and a bad curse. She even leaned over and spit into a container, clearly uncomfortable with whatever she believed she was experiencing. Then her voice changed. It deepened into something harsher, more strained, almost like a man's voice. In a much darker tone, she said something along the lines of, "You won't be singing anymore." After some time, she seemed to come back to herself. She explained that she believed she had been tuned into a soldier from the opposing side, someone who had been frustrated by my singing during a battle, seeing it as encouragement for the enemy. According to her, that voice, the one that told me I wouldn't sing anymore, was the last thing he said before he killed me in that past life scenario. It was a strange and intense experience, and I still don't fully know what to make of it. I once spent time at a friend's house that had a noticeably large closet, unusually big for the size of the room. The floor inside was wooden, and according to my friend, strange things had been happening there for a while. He told me that he would sometimes hear what sounded like heavy footsteps, almost like boots, moving around inside the closet. On occasion, the closet light would turn on by itself, or there would be knocking from inside. He even said the door would sometimes open on its own, often around 5 a.m. These events happened often enough that they would wake him up. He also mentioned that being inside the closet gave off a strange, unsettling feeling, not necessarily scary, but just off. I had spent time there before without anything unusual happening, aside from a few distant knocks I didn't think much of. My friend did mention that things seemed to be happening more frequently lately, but I didn't give it much thought. The first and only night I stayed over, things took a different turn. Around midnight, we were in his room looking for a video game when we both clearly heard a knock on the door. We stopped and looked at each other, both acknowledging we heard it. We tried to ignore it and continue what we were doing. A few moments later, there was another knock, louder this time. My friend walked over and knocked back. There was no response. I joined him at the door, and we stood there for a minute. Then we both began to hear faint footsteps, like someone wearing heavy boots, moving somewhere nearby. The sound didn't seem to come from any specific direction. It just felt like it was there. That was enough for us. We ran downstairs to the basement, where the video game setup was, trying to put some distance between ourselves and whatever we had heard. My friend just said, "I told you." Later that night, we went back upstairs to sleep. I ended up sleeping on the floor while he got into bed. I'd forgotten about the closet until I laid down again, and suddenly the room didn't feel right. It was around 3 a.m., and his father was asleep in another room. The door to the bedroom was closed. No one else was in the house. I kept my back turned to the closet, not wanting to face it. I tried to distract myself with my iPod Touch because I felt anxious and on edge. Then, just after 5 a.m., I heard the sound of a doorknob turning, followed by a door creaking open. I immediately looked up, expecting it to be the bedroom door, but it wasn't. At the same time, my friend was still asleep, only a few feet away. I froze. I quickly pulled the blanket over me and couldn't bring myself to move. The air in the room suddenly felt colder, and I had the overwhelming sense that something was standing behind me, watching. After several minutes, I heard the door close again. That was the only thing that gave me any sense of relief. I stayed awake for a while after that, and eventually managed to get maybe an hour of sleep later in the morning. The next day, I told my friend what I experienced. He just said, "I told you," and mentioned that it hadn't even woken him up. I still hung out there after that, but I stuck to the basement. There were a few more moments with strange knocks or sounds, but over time, I just stopped reacting to it as much. Still, I never spent another night in that room again. I grew up in a rural, superstitious part of the world before eventually moving to the United States. In my family, it was common for the men or older boys to work the plantation by hand and bring back food for everyone. One time, I didn't bring back enough for an upcoming gathering we were planning. We were expecting guests, and it would have been embarrassing not to have enough food prepared. My mom and I argued about it that day, and I felt responsible for the situation. Wanting to make things right, I decided I would go back to the plantation in the early hours of the morning, around 3 a.m. The plantation was about an hour's walk away, up a mountain and through the forest. I got up, grabbed my phone for light, and brought a machete with me before setting out on the path. Halfway there, I passed through a dense, overgrown section of the trail and suddenly felt a strong, cold chill. I tried to ignore it, put in my earphones, and kept walking, relying only on my phone's light to guide me. I wasn't particularly aware of anything supernatural, but the atmosphere still made me uneasy. Eventually, I reached the plantation, gathered what I needed, and made my way back home, arriving around 7 a.m. My mom looked at me and immediately told me never to do something like that again. She was relieved that I had brought back the food, but she warned me that going alone at that time wasn't safe. Later, she explained that, in our village, parts of the plantation had historically been used as burial grounds for ancestors. She said that when I returned that morning, she could smell something like death on me, as if I had been near a decaying body. Whether it was coincidence or something else, it's an experience I've never forgotten.